Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. We have talked already in an earlier segment of proper theology about how God is creative. And we will, again, when the first snow falls, talk about what I like to call the profligacy of God. He's profligate. He's overflowing with giving. Not that he's wasteful, not that he's living a life of dissipation like the prodigal son, but that he is overflowing with bounty. But today, I'd like to make a counterpoint, not to undo or push against the previous point, but rather to affirm something that seems to push against it, but really doesn't. And that is simply this, that God is thrifty. God is thrifty. God doesn't waste anything. That should so absolutely delight us and overwhelm us. I mean, it should put us into a kind of ecstatic trance. You've heard the expression, the description of God's providence and his sovereignty, and how in times of difficulty we find ourselves looking at the tangled mess that's going on in our lives and just thinking, how can this be right? And yet we realize that what we're looking at is the backside of a tapestry. And that if we will just turn the tapestry around, we will see the beautiful thing that God's weaving. Well, that's true. It's true of all of our lives. It's true of all of history. Everything is bound together. There's not a stray strand anywhere. Every bit of the story, down to the tiniest detail, is part and parcel of telling the story. Every twist and turn of a leaf as it descends from the tree to the ground with the coming of autumn is a note in the symphony of the glory of God. Which symphony would be the poorer without it? Do you see how in the end these two things are one? God's profligacy and God's thriftiness. There's always more, but there's never too much. There's always the perfect amount, but there's never too little. A simple way to express the point is this, that every time you hear, whether it's a believer or an unbeliever, talking about the size and scope of the universe and trying to reach the conclusion that surely there must be life on other planets, this universe is far too large in scope to be all about us. The conclusion doesn't follow. But the premises are true. Yes, absolutely, the universe is far too large to be all about us. But it is exactly the right size to be all about him. God weaves together. I think it was John Piper maybe who said, at any given moment, God is doing thousands of things in your life. and you may be aware of 3 or 4. Every time you find yourself asking the question, why? Why is this happening? Why has God brought this to pass? How does this fit in? Why didn't it not go the way I thought it was going to go? Why didn't it go the way I thought God was going to make it go? Well, the answer's not that it's wasted. The answer's not, oh, this is off script. The answer's not, this is an ad lib. The answer may not show up for thousands of years. You're familiar with the butterfly effect. This idea deeply connected with chaos theory that suggests that if a butterfly flaps its wings in Japan, it can be all the difference in the world that ends up creating a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. It's absolutely true. What's more astonishing than that, however, is the God who ordained the butterfly to flap that wing, to bring this to pass. And his providential connectedness, his causal chains, not only travel all the way from Japan to the Gulf of Mexico, but they travel from day one to eternity. Is God thrifty? Is he frugal? There's not the first iota of waste in his story. And every single tiniest little element of the story exists for the purpose of communicating his glory. Do you appreciate your pastor? There's a lot of complaining, and understandably so, about what social media has done to our capacity to appreciate our pastors, because it's so easy to fill our playlists with the finest preachers of our day. We have a propensity to look down our noses at our local pastor. Well, one thing we need to start off with is understanding this. No matter how gifted a pastor far away may be, he cannot serve you more faithfully than the pastor in front of you. Now, I raise all this because we are halfway through the month of October. And October, in addition to being the first full month of fall and filled with leaves and pumpkins and all sorts of wonderful things, October is also Pastor Appreciation Month. Now, this is a relatively new phenomena. I'm not familiar, wasn't familiar growing up with the concept of a month devoted to pastoral appreciation. But I think it's a good thing and a healthy thing, not because what your pastor really needs is more gift cards to some local restaurant, but because we need to learn to appreciate our pastors. It is good and healthy for us. Remember when Paul, I don't remember which church it was, but he praised one of the churches for their financial support of his ministry. And he said to them, the reason I'm really excited about this is what it means to you. It's a blessing to you to be able to support this work. The same thing is true here. I do want your pastor to be blessed. But it's a blessing to you to slow down and take the time and to think through, and particularly on your knees in your prayers, to give thanks for your pastor. You may not know the appalling statistics related to pastoral burnout, pastors taking their own lives, pastors getting caught up in the most grievous of sins. It is bad. And one of the reasons that it's bad, is because pastors are sinners, just like the rest of us. But another reason it's bad is because we not only don't appreciate our pastor, we don't pray for him like we ought. Do you understand the zeal and the focus and the passion that principalities and powers have against your pastor, precisely because they understand how impactful he can be for the kingdom in your life? I suggest to you that pastors, probably every one of them, have been given a demon whose sole job has been to follow the pastor around and everywhere he goes to say to him, "You're no good, you're worthless, no one listens to you, no one's being benefited by your ministry, you are a failure." That's what the pastor carries with him every day. And it is wearying. And the serpent and his minions come after the pastor's marriage. They come after the pastor's thought life. They come after the pastor's finances. All of these things are there to distract him and to discourage him. And your calling, not just this month, but all the time, is to be a blessing to him. Now, how do you do that? I'm not against you giving him a gift certificate to a local restaurant. You might like that very much. But I can tell you what's even more effective. Tell him that you appreciate him. And tell him why you appreciate him. And when you tell him why you appreciate him, don't tell him what you think he wants to hear, because here's what he wants to hear. It's not how gifted he is as a preacher. It's not the beauty of his prayers. It's not the thoughtfulness of his counseling. What he wants to hear is that you are growing in grace and wisdom, that you are growing in maturity as a believer and a follower of Jesus Christ, that you're being helped by his ministry. That's what he longs to know. And if you tell him, you'll build him up. But it's almost better not if you tell him, because pastors have this defense mechanism, this assumption that when someone speaks well to them about their ministry, that it's just flattery. But if you tell someone else, and that someone else tells your pastor, you bypass that objection. Speak to your pastor's wife. Tell her, "I am so grateful for your husband. He has helped me. His sermon series on thus and so has made a real impact in my life. My wife is better off because of the impact your husband has had on me." Tell the pastor's wife. Tell the elders in the church. Tell your neighbors in the pew. And word will get back to him. And he'll be encouraged. And you will be blessed. Is it a sin to celebrate Halloween? Well, Halloween is coming up, and one of the scariest parts of the holiday are the debates among Christians trying to answer this question. There can be, like on the question of the celebration of Christmas or the celebration of Resurrection Day, some intense feelings. There can be some less than careful arguments. And I'm coming into this honestly without a strong feeling one way or another. In fact, most of the time over the last 20 or 30 years when I've been asked about this question, my answer has been, I don't know and I don't care. And the reason I would answer this way is because I was deeply committed, and remain so, deeply committed to the idea that Halloween is irrelevant because October 31st is Reformation Day. That's something worth celebrating. That's worth something rejoicing over. Now, don't misunderstand. I never took the view that, well, hey, we've got to find a Christian alternative to Halloween. What can we find Christian-y on this day? Oh, look at that. There's a Reformation. No, it's grown out of a gratitude for the Reformation that I've had that view. But I understand that not everybody has the same zeal, the same joy over the Reformation that I do. Not all of you have Luther in a Playmobil, Luther on a pillow, Luther as a bobblehead, Luther hanging on your wall. So I want to try and answer the question gently, peacefully, and I don't want anybody getting mad one way or the other. Here's my thought, and it's just my thought. This is not thus saith the Lord. 1, the history behind Halloween should certainly give us pause, but does not necessarily settle the question. That is, I have no argument against the idea that Halloween did begin as a pagan celebration, and in fact, I'm willing to acknowledge that it is still celebrated as a pagan celebration in certain circles. And that should cause us to be careful, to be cautious, to say, wait a minute, I don't want to be going to essentially entering into a pagan celebration. Don't. However, I don't think it's the same thing to say, I think it's a genetic fallacy to say that because 500 years ago, wicked people celebrated on this day, therefore, we're not allowed to give candy to our neighbors. Because people used to believe that souls were set free on this day, the day before All Saints Day, that therefore it's wrong to have your granddaughter dress up like a princess. There's things change, meanings change, and I don't want to take the position that blessing your neighbors, being kind, starting conversations, and by the way, that's what we do. It's our habit not to hand out gospel tracts. We're not that pious, but if possible, on Halloween Day, instead of waiting by the door for the trick-or-treaters to come, we go out in the driveway and we start a little fire, and we sit out there, and it gives us an opportunity. They get warmed up by the fire. It gives us a chance to actually talk to and get to know these neighbors. And we give them candy. So here's, at the end of the day, here's where I'm going to end up on this. Just like every other festival and season, I think it's important that those who, without a thought, simply embrace whatever it is their neighbors are doing, whatever it is people are doing out in the broader world, we need to have a deeper care, a greater caution. At the same time, I think it's important that we not be reactionary. Our neighbors are doing this, therefore it must be wicked. Our neighbors are having a good time, therefore we have to be grumpy. Our neighbors are giving out candy, therefore we need to give out rocks or popcorn balls. Bleh. Now, the other thing I would want to mention And this is maybe a good way to measure some level of the danger that you might be in, is the whole macabre aspect of it. I'm not a fan of. I don't think death is something funny. I do think that Jesus wins and that death has lost its sting, but I don't think death is something funny. I don't think that ghosts are something funny. Even that, though, I'm not saying that I'm going to look down my nose at my Christian brother who goes to a Halloween party dressed as a skeleton. Not at all. So that's my wishy-washy, middle of the road, not too hot, not too cold take on whether or not it's a sin to celebrate Halloween. I do know this. I know that Jesus is Lord of every day, and that we're called to acknowledge him and to give thanks in all things. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com and join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.